The communication array on station Kepler-7 flickered with static before the message broke through. Commander Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. The automated deep space sensors had detected something massive moving through the outer territories, something that shouldn't exist according to every known law of physics and stellar mechanics. "Ma'am, you need to see this," Lieutenant Rashid called from his station, his voice tight with urgency. The young officer had been monitoring the frontier warning systems for 3 years, and Sarah had never heard that tone from him before. She crossed the command deck in 4 quick strides, her boots clicking against the metal floor. The display showed a formation of ships, but calling them ships felt inadequate. They were constructs of impossible geometry, vessels that seemed to bend space around them like water flowing around stones. The sensor data made no sense. The readings suggested technology centuries beyond anything humanity had achieved, and humanity had been the dominant force in this sector for nearly 200 years. "Send an emergency alert to Central Command," Sarah ordered, her mind already racing through protocols and procedures. "Priority Alpha, unknown vessels, possibly hostile, moving through Sector 7 Delta. Request immediate military response." The message went out through the quantum relay network, traveling faster than light itself, carrying the warning back to the heart of the Galactic Empire. Sarah expected acknowledgement within minutes. The Empire prided itself on rapid response times, on maintaining security across thousands of colonized worlds. 3 hours passed before the reply came. Sarah had sent 4 additional messages in that time, each more urgent than the last. The unknown vessels had changed course, moving with deliberate purpose toward the populated systems of the outer frontier. Station Kepler-7 tracked their progress with growing alarm. Whatever these things were, they weren't lost explorers or peaceful traders. When the hologram finally materialized, it showed Admiral Varric, a Zenthari officer whose purple-scaled face held an expression of barely concealed irritation. The Zenthari had been the Empire's founding species, the civilization that had united 100 worlds under one banner before humanity even left its home system. "Commander Chen," Varric said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless standard. "Your frontier alert has been reviewed by Central Command." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Reviewed, not acted upon, not taken seriously. Reviewed. "Admiral, the unknown vessels are continuing to advance. Based on current trajectory, they'll reach the terminus colonies within 72 hours. We need fleet support immediately." Varric's crest flattened against his skull, a gesture Sarah had learned to recognize as dismissive condescension. "Commander, we have analyzed your sensor data. The readings are clearly corrupted. No species in this galaxy possesses technology of that magnitude. Your equipment requires calibration." "Admiral, with respect, we've run full diagnostics 3 times. The sensors are functioning perfectly." "Whatever these things are, they're real, and they're coming." The Admiral's expression hardened. "Commander Chen, Central Command deals with dozens of false alarms from frontier stations every cycle. Your human tendency toward paranoia is well documented. We will not divert fleet resources based on faulty sensor readings and overactive imaginations." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed simply because of her species. Humans were still the newcomers in the Empire, still treated like anxious children by the elder races who had built this civilization before Earth even discovered fire. "Admiral, I am formally requesting that Central Command send at least a reconnaissance squadron to investigate. If I'm wrong, you can discipline me for wasting resources." "But if I'm right, and you ignore this warning, entire colonies could be at risk." Varric's translator emitted something that might have been a sigh. "Your request is noted and denied. Maintain standard observation protocols. If your phantom vessels materialize into something tangible, report again. Central Command out." The hologram vanished, leaving Sarah staring at empty air. Around her, the command deck had gone silent. Every officer present had heard the exchange, had witnessed the casual dismissal of their warning. "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Rashid's voice was quiet, uncertain. "What do we do?" Sarah turned back to the main display, watching the unknown vessels continue their inexorable advance. In her 10 years of service, she had learned to recognize patterns, to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her now. "We do our jobs," she said firmly. "Continue tracking those vessels. I want detailed logs of every movement, every energy signature, every piece of data we can collect, and send encrypted copies to every frontier station in the sector. If Central Command won't listen, maybe someone else will." The station's AI chimed softly. "Commander, incoming transmission from the Terminus colonies." The hologram that appeared showed Governor Marcus Webb, a weathered human administrator who had spent 40 years building settlements in the frontier territories. His face showed the kind of concern that Sarah felt in her bones. "Sarah, we received your alert," Marcus said, skipping any formal greeting. "Central Command contacted us with orders to disregard your warning. They told us you were experiencing technical difficulties." "That's not true, Marcus. The sensors are fine. Something is coming. Something big. And the Empire is choosing not to believe us." The governor's expression grew grim. "Because we're humans running a human colony on the ass end of nowhere. The Zenthari never forget that we're the youngest species in the Empire. They don't trust our judgment." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest, but she forced it down. Anger wouldn't help anyone right now. "Marcus, you need to prepare defensive measures. Get your civilians into the underground shelters. Power up whatever weapons systems you have. I know they're not military grade, but they're better than nothing." "You really think it's that serious?" "I think Central Command is making a mistake," Sarah said carefully. "And I think the people who will pay for that mistake are us. The humans on the frontier who nobody thinks are worth protecting." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll start preparations. Quietly, so we don't cause a panic. But Sarah, if you're wrong about this, both our careers are over." "If I'm wrong, I'll gladly face any consequence," Sarah replied. "But if I'm right and we do nothing, we'll be facing something much worse than a disciplinary hearing." Over the next 48 hours, Station Kepler 7 became a hub of frantic activity. Sarah sent out warnings to every frontier settlement, every mining operation, every deep space facility that would listen. Some acknowledged the message and began preparations. Others, particularly those governed by non-human administrators, dismissed the warning as human hysteria. The unknown vessels continued their advance, never deviating from their course. Sarah's team worked in rotating shifts, monitoring every sensor, collecting every scrap of data. The more they learned, the more disturbing the picture became. Lieutenant Rashid brought his findings to Sarah's ready room on the second day. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he transferred data to her personal console. "Ma'am, I've been analyzing the energy signatures from those vessels. I had to run the calculations 4 times because I didn't believe the results." Sarah studied the numbers, feeling her blood run cold. "These power readings, they can't be accurate." "They are, ma'am. Each of those vessels is outputting more energy than our entire station generates in a year. And there are 43 of them in formation." The implications were staggering. This wasn't a diplomatic mission or a trade fleet. This was a war fleet, equipped with technology that made the Empire's most advanced battleships look like primitive toys. "Have you shared this with Central Command?" Rashid nodded miserably. "I sent 3 reports. The last response I received told me to stop flooding their channels with corrupted data. They threatened to file an official complaint about my competence." Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Admiral Varric by his scaled throat and force him to look at the evidence. But she was trapped here on the frontier, hundreds of light years from the power centers of the Empire, shouting warnings that nobody wanted to hear. "Keep monitoring," she told Rashid. "Keep recording everything. When this is over, one way or another, there's going to be an investigation. I want a complete record of what we saw and what we tried to do about it." The Terminus colonies began their evacuation on the third day. Governor Webb had mobilized every transport, every cargo hauler, every vessel capable of carrying people away from the outer settlements. He couldn't evacuate everyone. There simply wasn't enough time or ships, but he could get the most vulnerable to safety. Sarah watched the evacuation feeds with a mixture of pride and sorrow. These were her people, humans who had traveled across the galaxy to build new homes on hostile worlds. They trusted her warning even when their own government dismissed it. That trust was both humbling and terrifying. The unknown vessels entered the Terminus system 56 hours after the first detection. Sarah watched them emerge from faster-than-light travel, their impossible geometries resolving into something that looked almost organic. They moved like living things, coordinated and purposeful. "Ma'am, they're launching smaller craft," the tactical officer reported. "Hundreds of them. They're heading directly for Terminus Prime." Sarah keyed the emergency channel. "All frontier stations, this is Kepler 7. Unknown vessels have entered Terminus system and launched attack craft. I repeat, this is not a drill. We are under attack." The Empire's response came 20 minutes later, and it wasn't from Central Command. It was from Admiral Dracoth, commander of the Third Fleet, a human officer who had fought his way up through ranks that tried to keep his species in subordinate positions. "Kepler 7, this is Admiral Dracoth. Third Fleet is en route to Terminus. ETA 4 hours. Hold your position and continue monitoring. I'm sorry nobody listened to you, Commander. We should have known better." 4 hours. Sarah did the math and felt her heart sink. The attack craft would reach Terminus Prime in less than 30 minutes. Whatever was about to happen would be over long before the fleet arrived. The assault on Terminus Prime was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The attack craft didn't use conventional weapons. Instead, they released some kind of energy field that simply disintegrated matter on contact. Buildings, vehicles, defensive installations, everything touched by that field ceased to exist. But Governor Webb had used his time well. The majority of the civilian population was underground, sheltered in bunkers that had been designed to withstand asteroid impacts. The remaining defenders, a mix of colonial militia and automated defense systems, fought back with everything they had. It wasn't enough. Sarah watched helplessly as the attack continued, as the unknown aggressors systematically dismantled the surface infrastructure of humanity's frontier colonies, but they didn't target the bunkers. That realization came slowly, a pattern emerging from the chaos. "They're not trying to kill everyone," Lieutenant Rashid observed, his voice filled with confusion. "They're destroying infrastructure but avoiding civilian casualties when possible." "It's a demonstration," Sarah said quietly. "They're showing us how vulnerable we are, how easily they could destroy everything if they wanted to." The attack lasted for 45 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault craft withdrew. They returned to their massive carriers, which then turned and jumped back into faster-than-light travel, vanishing from the Terminus system as if they had never been there. Sarah sat in her command chair, staring at the tactical display, trying to process what had just happened. The colonies were damaged but intact. Casualties were surprisingly low, considering the scale of the attack. But the message was unmistakable. Admiral Dracoth's fleet arrived 3 hours later to find smoking ruins and shocked survivors. The Admiral's face appeared on Sarah's display, his expression grim. "Commander Chen, Central Command is requesting a full report. They want to know what happened." Sarah felt a bitter laugh building in her throat. What happened is exactly what I warned them would happen. We were attacked by an unknown force with technology beyond our understanding. And if Governor Webb hadn't evacuated and prepared defenses, we'd be counting bodies in the thousands instead of dozens. I believe you, Commander. But you need to understand something. Central Command is going to try to bury this. They're going to classify the reports, minimize the incident, and make sure the Empire doesn't know how badly they failed to protect the frontier. The words didn't surprise Sarah. The Empire had been built on an image of invincibility, of perfect security maintained by the elder races who knew better than everyone else. Admitting that they had ignored a legitimate threat because it came from humans would undermine that image. "What about the next attack?" Sarah asked. "Because there will be one. This was a warning, a test. They wanted to see how we'd respond." Dracoth's expression grew even more serious. "That's why I'm here, Commander. I'm organizing a task force of frontier commanders, people who understand that we can't rely on Central Command to protect us. We need to prepare our own defense systems, share intelligence, coordinate responses. Are you in?" Sarah thought about her career, about the years she had spent working to earn respect within the Empire's military structure. Joining what amounted to an unofficial alliance of frontier forces would effectively end any hope of advancement to the inner systems. She would be labeled a troublemaker, a human who couldn't follow proper command channels. Then she thought about the families sheltering in bunkers on Terminus Prime, about the colonists who had trusted her warning when their own government wouldn't. "I'm in," she said firmly. "What do you need from me?" The Central Command Tribunal convened 3 weeks after the Terminus attack. Sarah stood at attention in the sterile hearing room, surrounded by holographic projections of officers from across the Empire. Admiral Varric sat at the center of the panel, his purple scales gleaming under the artificial lights. His expression suggested he would rather be anywhere else. The charges against her were carefully worded to avoid any mention of ignored warnings or command failures. Instead, Sarah faced accusations of unauthorized communications with civilian authorities, creating panic among frontier populations and exceeding her authority by coordinating defensive measures without proper authorization. "Commander Chen," Admiral Varric began, his translator turning his words into cold, precise, standard language. "You stand accused of multiple violations of military protocol. How do you respond?" Sarah kept her voice level, professional. "I followed proper procedures for reporting a legitimate threat, Admiral. When those procedures failed to produce an adequate response, I took action to protect civilian lives. I would make the same choices again." A Zenthari officer to Varric's left leaned forward. "You distributed classified sensor data to unauthorized personnel. You encouraged colonial governors to divert resources to defensive preparations based on your personal interpretation of unclear evidence. You created chaos in a stable sector." "Stable until unknown forces attacked," Sarah replied. "The chaos you mentioned saved lives. Governor Webb's evacuations meant civilian casualties were minimal. Without those preparations, we would have lost thousands." Varric's crest flattened in that dismissive gesture Sarah had come to hate. The incident at Terminus was unfortunate, but preliminary analysis suggests it was an isolated event, a minor territorial dispute with a previously unknown species. Your dramatic warnings and unauthorized actions were excessive and unnecessary. Sarah felt anger surge through her veins, hot and fierce. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain control. Losing her temper now would only prove their assumptions about emotional, unstable humans. "Admiral, with respect, nothing about that attack was minor. The technology displayed by those vessels exceeds anything in the Empire's arsenal. They demonstrated the capability to dismantle our frontier colonies with minimal effort. Dismissing this as a territorial dispute is dangerously naive." The room went silent. Several of the holographic officers shifted uncomfortably. Sarah realized she had crossed a line, had called a superior officer naive in an official hearing. But the truth needed to be spoken, even if it cost her everything. Varric's eyes narrowed. "Commander, you will watch your tone. This tribunal will determine the appropriate response to the Terminus incident. Your role is to answer questions, not to question the judgment of your superiors." Before Sarah could respond, a new hologram materialized in the chamber. Admiral Dracoth appeared. His human features set in an expression of barely controlled fury. His presence was unexpected, a breach of tribunal protocol. "Admiral Varric," Dracoth said, his voice carrying the weight of command earned through decades of service. "I apologize for interrupting these proceedings, but there's been a development that requires immediate attention." Varric's crest rose in agitation. "Admiral Dracoth, this is highly irregular. This tribunal is addressing internal matters of the Frontier Command. Your presence is not required." "It's required now," Dracoth replied, "because the unknown vessels have returned. They're currently attacking the Kepler mining colonies, and this time they're not being careful about civilian casualties." The tribunal chamber erupted in activity. Officers began accessing tactical feeds, calling for updates, demanding information. Sarah felt ice flood her veins. The Kepler colonies housed over 50,000 people, mostly human and Rigelian families who had spent generations developing the rich mineral deposits in that system. Varric recovered his composure quickly. "How long until fleet response?" "The nearest Imperial fleet is 6 hours out," Dracoth said. "The attack began 20 minutes ago. By the time any official response arrives, the colonies will either be destroyed or the attackers will have withdrawn." Sarah couldn't stay silent. "What about the Frontier Task Force? Can we organize a response?" Varric turned to her, his expression hardening. "Commander Chen, you are in the middle of a disciplinary hearing. You will remain silent unless directly questioned." "Admiral," Dracoth interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. "Commander Chen organized a network of frontier stations after Terminus. They've been sharing intelligence and coordinating defensive measures. If we activate that network now, we might be able to mount some kind of response." "An unauthorized network," Varric said coldly, "created in direct violation of command structure and protocol. The existence of such a network is itself grounds for court-martial." "The existence of such a network might be the only thing that saves 50,000 lives," Dracoth shot back. "Admiral, I know you want to maintain proper protocols and preserve the command structure, but we have a crisis happening right now. We can argue about procedure after we deal with the immediate threat." The other tribunal members were exchanging glances, clearly uncertain. The Empire had operated for centuries on rigid hierarchy and established protocols. The idea of activating an unauthorized military network, even in an emergency, violated everything they had been trained to believe. Sarah watched Admiral Varric's face, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing risks and benefits, political considerations against military necessities. The Zenthari were master politicians, skilled at navigating complex social structures. But that political skill sometimes made them slow to act when action was desperately needed. "Very well," Varric finally said. "Commander Chen, you are temporarily released from these proceedings. You will coordinate with Admiral Dracoth to activate your frontier network. But understand this, every action you take will be scrutinized. If you fail, or if your unauthorized network causes additional problems, the consequences will be severe." Sarah snapped a crisp salute. "Understood, Admiral. Permission to leave the chamber?" "Granted. Dismissed." Sarah and Dracoth materialized on the command deck of his flagship, the Indomitable, a heavy cruiser that represented the cutting edge of human military engineering. The deck was already at full alert status, officers moving with practiced efficiency as they processed incoming data. "Status report," Dracoth ordered as soon as they arrived. Captain Jennifer Cole, a veteran officer with silver threading through her dark hair, turned from the main tactical display. "Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from 3 Kepler colonies. The attack pattern is different from Terminus. They're not being surgical anymore. They're hitting everything, civilian and military targets without discrimination." Sarah moved to the tactical station, her fingers flying over the holographic controls as she accessed the Frontier network. Dozens of stations responded instantly, ready and waiting for coordination. These were the commanders who had listened after Terminus, who had believed the warnings when Central Command wouldn't. "All Frontier stations, this is Commander Chen. Unknown hostiles are engaging Kepler colonies. I need status reports and available assets. We're going to mount a coordinated response." The responses came in quickly. Most Frontier stations had limited military capability, but together they represented a significant force. Defense platforms, patrol ships, armed merchant vessels, even converted mining equipment that could be weaponized in a pinch. "We have 17 combat-capable vessels within 3 hours of Kepler," Sarah reported to Dracoth. "Another 30 ships if we expand to a 5-hour radius. It's not a fleet, but it's something." "It's more than something," Dracoth replied. "It's a statement. We're showing these attackers that the Frontier isn't defenseless. Captain Cole, plot an intercept course for Kepler. Maximum speed." The Indomitable's engines roared to life, pushing the massive vessel toward the attack site. Around them, the improvised Frontier fleet began to converge. Human ships mostly, but also Rigelian vessels and a few independent traders who had thrown in with the Frontier network. Sarah coordinated the fleet movements, assigning sectors and organizing a defensive formation. It was chaotic, nothing like the precise military operations the Empire preferred. But it was effective, and it was happening now, not in 6 hours when the official response would arrive. Lieutenant Rashid appeared on her comm screen, transmitting from Station Kepler 7. "Ma'am, we're analyzing the attack patterns. These vessels are using the same disintegration weapons as before, but they're targeting specific infrastructure, power generation, communication arrays, orbital facilities. They're trying to isolate the colonies," Sarah realized. "Cut them off from any chance of support or evacuation." "That's what it looks like. But ma'am, there's something else. The attack craft are broadcasting a signal. It's not in any known language, but the pattern suggests it's meant to be communication." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Can you decode it?" "Working on it, but the AI suggests it might be a demand or ultimatum. They're trying to tell us something." Before Sarah could respond, the tactical display erupted with new contacts. The main attack fleet had arrived in the Kepler system, and it was substantially larger than the force that had hit Terminus. Over 80 vessels, all displaying those same impossible geometries and massive energy signatures. "They escalated," Dracoth observed grimly. "They brought overwhelming force this time." The Indomitable and the Frontier fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system. Sarah stared at the tactical display, at the sheer scale of the attacking force arrayed before them. Her improvised fleet of 17 combat vessels looked pathetic in comparison. "All ships, hold formation," Dracoth ordered. "Do not engage unless fired upon. Commander Chen, have your people at Kepler 7 made any progress on that signal?" Sarah checked her display. "They're sending me a preliminary translation now." The message that appeared on her screen was simple, stark, and terrifying. "Surrender human territories. Depart this sector. Compliance brings survival. Resistance brings extinction." Sarah read it 3 times, making sure she understood correctly. This wasn't a random attack or a territorial dispute. This was an ultimatum. An unknown force was demanding that humanity abandon the Frontier, leave behind everything they had built over generations. "They're targeting us specifically," she said quietly. "Not the Empire, not the Zenthari or the Rigelians or any other species. Just humans. Dracoth's expression darkened. Send that translation to Central Command, Priority Alpha, and then broadcast it across the Frontier network. Everyone needs to know what we're dealing with. The attacking fleet had paused their assault on the Kepler colonies, their vessels holding position in a clear formation. They were waiting, Sarah realized, waiting to see how the Frontier fleet would respond to their demand. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Captain Cole asked. Dracoth stood from his command chair, his posture rigid with determination. "Open a channel to the attacking fleet. Full broadcast. Let everyone hear this." The communications officer worked quickly, establishing a connection. Dracoth's voice rang out across the system, transmitted to friend and foe alike. "Unknown vessels. This is Admiral Marcus Dracoth of the Human Federation Fleet. We have received your ultimatum. Our answer is no. Humanity will not surrender its territories. We will not abandon our homes because you demand it. If you want this sector, you'll have to take it from us." Sarah held her breath, waiting for the response. The attacking fleet remained motionless for 30 seconds that felt like years. Then slowly, they began to advance. "All ships, battle stations," Dracoth ordered. "Prepare to engage. This is going to get ugly, but we hold the line here. No retreat, no surrender." The Frontier fleet moved to intercept, 17 ships against 80. The odds were impossible, the outcome seemingly predetermined. But as Sarah watched her tactical display, she saw something that gave her hope. More ships were arriving. Frontier stations she hadn't even contacted were sending their assets. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, personal yachts, anything that could mount a weapon or serve as a shield. Hundreds of ships, most of them civilian, crewed by ordinary people who refused to flee their homes. "Sir, we're being hailed by the colony governor on Kepler Prime," the communications officer reported. The hologram that appeared showed a Rigelian female, her blue skin marked with the scars of decades of frontier life. "Admiral Dracoth, this is Governor Sireth. We appreciate your fleet coming to our defense, but I need you to understand something. We're not evacuating. The humans taught us something after Terminus. They taught us that sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when the odds are against you. My people are staying. We'll fight beside you." Similar messages came in from the other Kepler colonies. Humans, Rigelians, even a few Zenthari settlers who had made their lives on the frontier. All of them choosing to stay, to resist, to refuse the ultimatum. The battle that followed would be recorded in Imperial history, though the official records would sanitize much of what actually happened. The attacking fleet possessed superior technology, their disintegration weapons capable of tearing through shields and armor like tissue paper. But the Frontier fleet had something their enemy didn't expect. They had numbers, improvisation, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sarah coordinated the defensive efforts from her station aboard the Indomitable, directing ships to exploit every weakness, every gap in the enemy formation. The civilian vessels became shields, their reinforced hulls absorbing hits meant for the military craft. Mining equipment became improvised weapons, launching asteroids and debris at enemy vessels with terrifying accuracy. The attacking fleet began to falter, their organized formation breaking as they tried to deal with an enemy that refused to fight by conventional rules. These weren't disciplined military forces following textbook tactics. These were frontier survivors who had learned to adapt or die. Hours into the battle, something shifted. The attacking vessels began to withdraw, pulling back from their assault despite having suffered relatively light casualties. Sarah watched in confusion as they regrouped at the edge of the system. The enemy retreat gave the Frontier fleet a moment to regroup. Sarah assessed the damage reports flooding in from across the Kepler system. 15 ships lost, 8 more critically damaged, and nearly 2,000 casualties. The numbers were devastating, but they could have been so much worse. "They're forming up for another attack," Captain Cole reported, her voice strained from hours of combat coordination. "But their formation is different, more cautious. Sarah studied the tactical display with growing realization. They didn't expect resistance. They thought we'd either flee or die quickly. We've forced them to reassess. Admiral Dracoth leaned against the tactical console, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Commander, have we heard anything from Central Command? Any indication that the Imperial fleet is actually responding?" Sarah checked her communications log and felt her stomach sink. "Nothing official, sir, but I'm picking up encrypted chatter suggesting the Imperial fleet is being redirected to defensive positions around the core worlds. They're protecting the inner systems and leaving the frontier to fend for itself." The silence that followed was heavy with bitter understanding. The Empire had made its choice. When faced with an unknown threat, the elder races had prioritized their own territories over the frontier settlements where humans and other species had built new lives. "Then we're on our own," Dracoth said quietly. "Truly on our own." Before anyone could respond, the tactical display erupted with new contacts, but these weren't enemy vessels. A massive fleet was emerging from faster-than-light travel, hundreds of ships appearing in the Kepler system. Sarah's first thought was that the attackers had called in reinforcements, but then she recognized the ship signatures. "Sir, those are Imperial vessels," the tactical officer reported, disbelief coloring his voice. "Third, 7th, and 9th fleets, full battle groups." The hologram of Admiral Varric materialized on the command deck, but his expression was completely different from the dismissive superiority he had shown during the tribunal. He looked shaken, perhaps even afraid. "Admiral Dracoth, Commander Chen," Varric began, his translator struggling to capture the complexity of emotions in his voice. "Central Command has reviewed the situation. We are deploying all available forces to defend the frontier territories." "What changed?" Sarah asked bluntly, not bothering with proper military formality. 3 hours ago, you were ready to court-martial me. Now you're sending 3 full fleets?" Varric's crest flattened in that familiar gesture, but this time it seemed more like shame than dismissal. "Commander, the attacking forces broadcast their ultimatum across all Imperial channels. It was not addressed only to humanity. It was addressed to all species who serve alongside humans in the frontier territories. They demanded that we abandon our human allies, leave them to be destroyed, or face escalating attacks." The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. "They wanted you to betray us. To prove that the Empire would sacrifice humans to preserve itself." "Yes," Varric admitted, and for a moment, there were those in Central Command who seriously considered it. But then we received reports of the battle here in Kepler. We saw how civilian vessels stood alongside military forces. We saw Rigelians and Zenthari colonists choosing to fight beside humans rather than evacuate. We saw the frontier network you built responding in hours while our official forces took days. Dracoth stepped forward, his expression hard. "And you realized that if you abandoned the frontier, if you let an unknown force dictate which species you protected, you would prove that the Empire has no real integrity, that all your talk of unity and shared civilization was empty propaganda." "We realized many things, Admiral," Varric replied. "Most importantly, we realized that we were wrong to dismiss Commander Chen's warnings. We were wrong to underestimate the threat, and we were wrong to treat the frontier territories as expendable assets, rather than vital parts of our civilization." The Imperial fleets moved into defensive positions, their massive vessels forming a wall of military power between the Kepler colonies and the attacking force. Sarah watched the enemy formation shift, their vessels clearly reassessing the situation. They had come expecting to crush a few scattered defenders. Instead, they faced the combined might of the Galactic Empire. "All Imperial forces, this is Fleet Commander Varric." The Admiral's voice rang out across all channels. "Hostile vessels, you have attacked sovereign territory of the Galactic Empire. You have demanded we abandon our citizens and allies. You have attempted to divide us through threats and intimidation. We reject your ultimatum completely. Withdraw now, or face the consequences." The enemy fleet held position for several minutes. Then, without any response or acknowledgement, they began to withdraw. Their vessels accelerated toward the edge of the system, preparing to jump into faster-than-light travel. But they didn't jump immediately. They remained at the boundary, visible on long-range sensors, a silent reminder that this confrontation was far from over. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They're sending a message. They're showing us they can leave whenever they want, that we didn't drive them away. They chose to withdraw." "Pride," Dracoth observed. "They want us to know this isn't a victory. It's a temporary pause." Varick's hologram turned to face Sarah directly. "Commander Chen, the tribunal hearing against you is dismissed. All charges are dropped. Instead, I'm here to offer you a promotion and a new assignment. We need someone to organize a proper frontier defense command, someone who understands the unique challenges of these territories and has the trust of the people who live here." Sarah felt the weight of the offer settle on her shoulders. It was everything she should want, recognition and advancement after years of being overlooked and dismissed. But something felt wrong about accepting rewards after so many had died, after her warnings had been ignored until it was almost too late. "With respect, Admiral, I'll accept the assignment, but not the promotion. The frontier network I built wasn't about advancing my career. It was about protecting people who couldn't rely on the Empire to protect them. If I take command of a formal frontier defense force, I want it to be clear that I'm doing it for them, not for rank or recognition." Varick's expression was unreadable, but he nodded slowly. "As you wish, Commander. Report to Frontier Command Headquarters within the week. We have much work to do." The hologram faded, leaving Sarah alone with Dracoth and the command crew of the Indomitable. The Admiral studied her with an expression that mixed respect and concern. "You know what you just did, don't you?" Dracoth asked quietly. "You could have leveraged this situation for significant advancement. Instead, you tied yourself permanently to the frontier. Central Command will never fully trust you now. You'll always be seen as someone who puts loyalty to the outer territories above loyalty to the Empire's hierarchy." "Good," Sarah replied, "because that's exactly what I am. The frontier isn't just some resource extraction zone or military buffer. It's home to millions of people who deserve the same protection and respect as anyone in the core worlds. If Central Command can't understand that, then I don't want their trust." Over the following weeks, Sarah worked to transform her informal frontier network into an official military command structure. It was challenging work, balancing the independence and adaptability that had made the network effective with the resources and support that came with official Imperial backing. Station Kepler-7 became the headquarters of the new Frontier Defense Command. Sarah insisted on staying in the outer territories rather than accepting a comfortable posting near the core worlds. If she was going to command forces responsible for defending the frontier, she needed to live there, to understand the daily realities her people faced. Lieutenant Rashid became her intelligence officer, continuing his work analyzing the enemy vessels and trying to understand their technology and motivations. The data he collected painted a disturbing picture. "Ma'am, I've been correlating reports from across the frontier," Rashid said during one of their daily briefings. "The attacking forces have been probing our defenses at multiple locations. Small incursions, quick strikes, always retreating before major forces can respond. They're testing us." Sarah studied the tactical maps spread across her office walls. Red markers indicated sites of enemy activity, creating a pattern that surrounded the human-majority territories of the frontier. "They're still focused on us specifically. Not random attacks, but a deliberate campaign targeting human colonies and mixed settlements where humans play a leadership role." "Why, though?" Rashid asked. "What makes humanity such a specific target? We're not the most technologically advanced species in the Empire. We don't control the most territory. By any objective measure, we're still one of the younger and weaker members of the galactic community. Sarah had been wrestling with that question since the first attack. Maybe that's exactly why. We're the newcomers, the ones who still remember being alone in the galaxy. We haven't been integrated into the Empire long enough to forget how to think and act independently. During the Kepler battle, it was human-led forces that organized the defense, while Imperial fleets were still deciding whether to respond. You think they're threatened by human adaptability? I think they're threatened by the idea that the Empire might not be as stable as it appears. Humanity joined the Galactic Empire as junior partners, grateful for the technology and security that came with membership. But we've never been comfortable with just following orders without question. We push boundaries, ask difficult questions, organize outside official channels when we think it's necessary. Rashid nodded slowly. And if humanity can do that, other species might start questioning the hierarchy too. The Empire has been stable for centuries because everyone accepts their place in the order. Humans disrupt that. Exactly. So if you wanted to weaken the Empire, to destabilize its structure, targeting humanity makes strategic sense. Remove the disruptive element, show the other species that independence and initiative will be punished, and everyone falls back into line. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was an attempt to reshape the political structure of the galaxy by eliminating the species most likely to challenge established order. Governor Marcus Webb visited Station Kepler 7 3 months after the battle. The weathered administrator looked even more tired than Sarah remembered, the weight of rebuilding damaged colonies evident in every line of his face. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something that's been happening in the Terminus colonies, Marcus said, as they sat in her office overlooking the station's main operations center. We've been receiving communications from other frontier settlements, places we've never had much contact with before. They're asking about the defense network, about how we organized resistance against the attacks. That's good, isn't it? More settlements joining the network means better coordination and shared security. Marcus hesitated. It is good. But Sarah, they're not just asking about military defense. They're asking about political organization, about how we convinced Central Command to actually respond to frontier concerns, about whether we're planning to make demands for greater autonomy within the Empire. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. We're not planning anything like that. The Frontier Defense Command operates within the Imperial military structure. We're not some independence movement. But maybe we should be, Marcus said quietly. Not independence from the Empire entirely, but some kind of formal frontier council with actual authority. Sarah, the only reason Central Command responded during Kepler was because you'd built an independent command structure that could act without their approval. The only reason they take our concerns seriously now is because we proved we could organize and fight on our own if necessary. Marcus, that kind of talk is sedition. If Central Command even suspects the frontier territories are organizing for political autonomy, they'll come down on us hard. They already suspect it, Marcus replied. Admiral Varric isn't stupid. He knows that the frontier network represents a potential challenge to Imperial authority. Right now, he tolerates it because we're useful against the external threat. But once that threat diminishes, what do you think happens? Do they let us keep our independent command structure and organized settlements? Or do they find ways to break up what we've built? Sarah had been trying not to think about that question, but it demanded an answer. The Frontier Network had proven its value in crisis, but peace would bring different challenges. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we get ahead of the problem, Marcus said. We formally petition the Imperial Council for recognition as a frontier administrative zone with limited self-governance. We don't demand independence, just acknowledgement that the outer territories need different management than the core worlds. We frame it as improving efficiency and security, not as challenging Imperial authority. And if they refuse? Marcus met her eyes steadily. Then we'll know where we stand, and we'll have to make some difficult decisions about our future. The conversation haunted Sarah for days. She had never intended to become a political figure, had never wanted to challenge the structure of the empire. She was a military officer who had simply tried to protect people when the official systems failed them. But Marcus was right about one thing. The Frontier Network had changed the political landscape, whether she intended it or not. The next enemy attack came 4 months after Kepler, targeting an isolated research station near the Galactic Rim. The Frontier Defense Command responded immediately, dispatching patrol ships and coordinating with nearby settlements. The Imperial fleet arrived 6 hours later to find the situation already resolved, the attacking forces driven off by local defenders. Admiral Varick's reaction was telling. Instead of praising the efficient response, he issued a series of new protocols requiring Frontier forces to wait for Imperial fleet coordination before engaging hostile forces. The message was clear. Central Command was reasserting control, limiting the independence that had made the Frontier network effective. Sarah sat in her office reading the new protocols, feeling frustration build with each paragraph. These regulations would slow response times, would force Frontier commanders to wait for approval from officers hundreds of light years away who didn't understand local conditions. People would die while bureaucrats processed authorization requests. Her comm unit chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Dracoth. His face appeared on her screen, his expression grim. Commander Chen, I'm calling to inform you that I've been reassigned to the core worlds. My command of Frontier operations is being transferred to Admiral Koreth, a Zenthari officer with extensive experience in regulation compliance and administrative oversight. The words were carefully chosen, loaded with meaning. They were replacing an officer who understood the Frontier with someone focused on regulations and oversight, someone who would enforce Central Command's new protocols without question. Sir, that's a mistake. We need leadership that understands the unique challenges of Frontier defense. I agree, Commander, but my opinion wasn't requested. The decision has been made. I've been told that my approach to Frontier Command was too informal, that I allowed too much independent action by subordinate officers. They're cleaning house, bringing the Frontier territories back under proper control. Sarah felt cold anger settling in her chest. What they mean is they're breaking up the network that actually kept people safe because it threatens their authority. That's not something I can comment on officially, Dracoth said carefully. But I will say this. You've built something important here, Sarah. Something that transcends military command structures. Whatever happens next, remember that you did it to protect people, not to advance your own interests. That matters. The hologram faded, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her anger. She pulled up the roster of Frontier commanders, the list of officers who had responded to her calls during the Terminus and Kepler crises. These were people who understood what the Frontier network meant, who shared her commitment to protecting the outer territories. She began composing a message, choosing her words carefully. This was the moment Marcus Webb had predicted. The moment when she would have to decide between accepting Imperial authority or pushing back. The message went out to every Frontier commander, every settlement governor, every officer who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. The message was simple. Emergency conference, Station Kepler 7, 3 days, attendance mandatory. We need to talk about our future. The response was overwhelming. Over 200 commanders, governors, and administrators confirmed attendance. Some were human, but many represented other species who had made their lives on the Frontier. The elder races had dominated the Empire for centuries, but the Frontier was becoming something different, a place where all species worked together as equals because survival demanded it. The conference room on Station Kepler 7 had never been designed to hold this many people. Holograms filled every available space, creating a virtual assembly that represented the full diversity of the Frontier territories. Sarah stood at the center, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes focused on her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I'm sure you've all seen the new protocols from Central Command. You understand what they mean. They're reasserting control over frontier operations, limiting our ability to respond quickly to threats." Governor Sirith, the Rigelian from Kepler Prime, spoke up. "Commander Chen, I don't think anyone here is confused about what's happening. Central Command is punishing us for being too effective, for proving that we don't need their slow bureaucracy to keep ourselves safe. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to say words that might end her military career and mark her as a rebel. "We're going to petition the Imperial Council for formal recognition as a frontier autonomous zone. We'll acknowledge Imperial sovereignty. We'll continue to contribute to the Empire's defense and economy, but we'll govern our own territories according to our own needs. We'll have our own administrative structure, our own military command separate from the Imperial fleet, and the authority to make decisions without waiting for approval from the core worlds." The silence that followed was absolute. What Sarah was proposing wasn't quite independence, but it was close enough to make everyone nervous. It was a fundamental challenge to the Empire's centralized authority. "And if they refuse?" someone asked from the crowd. Sarah met the question head-on. "Then we'll have to consider whether we're better served remaining in an empire that treats us as expendable resources or establishing our own confederation of frontier territories. I'm not advocating for immediate independence, but I'm saying we need to be prepared for that possibility." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some argued for caution, for working within the existing system and hoping Central Command would see reason. Others pushed for immediate declaration of independence, for cutting ties with an empire that had repeatedly failed to protect them. Sarah listened to every argument, every concern, every hope and fear. Finally, they took a vote, not binding, but a measure of sentiment across the frontier territories. The results were overwhelming. 87% supported the petition for autonomous status, with provisions for independence if the petition was rejected. Sarah composed the formal petition that night, working with legal experts and diplomats to craft language that was firm but not inflammatory. The document acknowledged the Empire's historical role in protecting the galaxy, while arguing that the frontier territories had unique needs requiring local governance. It cited the repeated failures of Central Command to respond to legitimate threats, the success of locally coordinated defense efforts, and the growing sense of shared identity among frontier populations. The petition was transmitted to the Imperial Council 3 days later, signed by every government official, military commander, and civic leader in the frontier territories. It represented billions of citizens across hundreds of worlds, a unified voice demanding recognition and respect. The Empire's response came faster than Sarah expected. Within a week, she received orders to report to the Imperial capital for consultations. Not summons for trial or arrest, but consultations. Someone in Central Command understood that heavy-handed suppression would only strengthen the case for independence. Sarah made the journey to the core worlds aboard a military transport, watching the outer territories fall away behind her. She had spent her entire adult life working toward advancement in the Imperial military, trying to prove that humans deserved respect and recognition. Now she was potentially throwing all of that away, risking everything for a principle. The Imperial Council chambers were magnificent, a soaring space designed to inspire awe and reinforce the majesty of the Empire. Representatives from 100 worlds gathered here, the elder races occupying the central positions, while younger species like humanity sat in the outer rings. Sarah stood before the council, alone at the petitioner's podium, as they reviewed the frontier proposal. She watched the council members as they read, trying to gauge reactions. The Xanthari representatives looked offended, their crests raised in agitation. The Rigelian delegates seemed thoughtful, perhaps sympathetic. Human representatives were carefully neutral, afraid to show support for something that challenged imperial authority. High Chancellor Vorin, an ancient Zenthari whose scales had faded to pale silver, finally spoke. Commander Chen, this petition represents an unprecedented challenge to imperial unity. For centuries, the Empire has maintained peace and stability through centralized authority and clear hierarchies. What you're proposing would fracture that unity, potentially encouraging other regions to demand similar autonomy. Sarah chose her words carefully. High Chancellor, the frontier territories are not challenging imperial unity. We're trying to preserve it by addressing legitimate concerns before they become insurmountable problems. The alternative to granting limited autonomy isn't maintaining the status quo. It's facing widespread unrest or potentially losing the frontier territories entirely. Are you threatening secession, Commander? I'm stating reality, High Chancellor. The frontier population has lost faith in Central Command's ability and willingness to protect them. We've proven we can defend ourselves, we can govern ourselves, and we can coordinate across vast distances more effectively than the traditional imperial bureaucracy. If the Empire refuses to acknowledge those realities, if you continue to insist on centralized control that repeatedly fails us, then yes, secession will become increasingly likely. The chamber erupted in argument. Some council members demanded Sarah's immediate arrest for sedition. Others called for the military occupation of frontier territories to prevent rebellion. But a growing minority, particularly representatives from species that had also faced dismissal and prejudice from the elder races, began to argue in favor of the petition. The debate raged for 3 days. Sarah remained in the capital, waiting for a decision, watching the political maneuvering with a mixture of hope and dread. The Empire stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between maintaining rigid control or adapting to changing realities. The final vote was closer than anyone expected. The petition for frontier autonomy passed by a narrow margin, with significant restrictions and oversight provisions. The frontier territories would have their own administrative council and military command, but major decisions would still require imperial approval. It wasn't full autonomy, but it was a start, a recognition that the relationship between the core worlds and the frontier needed to change. Sarah returned to Station Kepler 7 with the news, finding a mixed reception waiting. Some celebrated the partial victory, while others saw it as insufficient compromise. But everyone understood that they had achieved something unprecedented. They had forced the Empire to change, to acknowledge that the frontier could no longer be treated as a subordinate region to be managed from afar. The unknown attackers returned 6 months after the vote, launching their largest offensive yet. But this time, the frontier territories were ready. The new autonomous military command responded instantly, coordinating a defense that involved hundreds of ships and dozens of settlements. The Imperial fleet provided support, but it was the frontier forces that led the engagement, that adapted to enemy tactics and ultimately drove them back. The battle lasted for 2 weeks, with fighting across a dozen systems. Casualties were severe on both sides, but the frontier held. More importantly, the coordinated defense demonstrated that the new autonomous structure worked, that decentralized command could be both effective and loyal to the larger empire. Sarah watched the final enemy vessels retreat from her command center on Kepler 7, surrounded by officers representing a dozen different species. They had come together not because of imposed hierarchy or traditional command structures, but because they shared a common purpose and mutual respect. "Status report," she ordered, though she already knew the broad outlines. The frontier had survived, had proven its strength and resilience. "Enemy forces have withdrawn beyond sensor range, ma'am," her tactical officer reported. "All frontier systems reporting secure. Casualties are being compiled, but preliminary estimates suggest 3,000 military and civilian deaths, with twice that number wounded. Sarah felt the weight of those numbers settle on her shoulders. 3,000 lives lost, thousands more forever changed by this conflict. It was a victory, but one that had come at terrible cost. Issue commendations for all officers and civilian volunteers who participated in the defense, Sarah ordered. And schedule a council meeting for next week. We need to discuss long-term security measures and reconstruction efforts. As the command center slowly returned to normal operations, Sarah retreated to her office. She stood at the window, looking out at the vastness of space, thinking about everything that had changed since that first warning she'd sent to Central Command so many months ago. The Empire had dismissed her alert, had refused to believe that a junior officer stationed on the frontier could understand threats better than the elder races with their centuries of experience. That dismissal had cost lives, had nearly cost entire colonies. But it had also revealed a deeper truth about the Empire's weakness, the conviction that traditional authority and established hierarchy could solve every problem. The frontier had proven something different. When given the freedom to adapt, to organize outside traditional structures, the outer territories had demonstrated capabilities that matched or exceeded the core worlds. They had saved themselves when the Empire wouldn't, had built new forms of cooperation that transcended the ancient prejudices of the elder races. Sarah knew the struggle wasn't over. The unknown attackers would return eventually, and Central Command would continue to resist frontier autonomy whenever possible. But something fundamental had changed. The outer territories had found their voice, had claimed their place as equals rather than subordinates. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, on their own terms. She thought about the tribunal where Admiral Varick had tried to discipline her for exceeding her authority, for refusing to wait for proper approval before acting to save lives. She thought about how close they had come to abandoning entire colonies because the Empire couldn't imagine that its traditional responses might be inadequate. Most of all, she thought about the people who had trusted her warnings, who had stood and fought when they could have fled, who had proved that courage and determination mattered more than advanced technology or ancient authority. The frontier had been dismissed, overlooked, treated as expendable. But the frontier had survived, had fought back, and had claimed its place in the galaxy. The Empire would never dismiss them again, because now everyone knew the price of ignoring the warnings from the edge of civilization. Sarah turned back to her desk, to the endless reports and decisions waiting for her attention. There would be more battles, more struggles, more moments when the frontier stood alone against impossible odds. But they would face those challenges together, united by the knowledge that they had already survived the Empire's dismissal and emerged stronger. The frontier alert had been ignored, and thousands had paid the price. But that mistake had forged something new, something the ancient Empire hadn't seen in centuries, a population that refused to accept that their lives mattered less than others, that demanded equality rather than accepting subordination, that would fight for their homes and their future, regardless of what the elder races thought was proper or possible. Sarah smiled grimly as she began processing the reconstruction requests. The Empire had learned its lesson the hard way. The frontier territories were no longer a distant concern to be managed from afar. They were a force in their own right, and anyone who dismissed them again would do so at their own peril. None of the initial attackers had returned alive from their dismissive assault on what they thought were weak, disorganized frontier settlements. That message would spread across the galaxy, a warning to anyone else who thought humanity and its frontier allies could be easily conquered. The Empire had dismissed the frontier alert. The Empire had nearly lost everything because of that dismissal. But the frontier had survived, had thrived, and had claimed its future. That was the story Sarah would tell, the legacy she would leave for those who came after. Not a tale of perfect victory, but one of resilience, adaptation, and the refusal to accept that anyone's warnings or concerns or lives mattered less than others. The galaxy was vast, full of threats and challenges that the Empire's traditional structures couldn't always address. But the frontier was ready now, organized and determined and united. Whatever came next, they would face it together as equals, with the knowledge that they had already overcome the greatest threat of all, being dismissed by those who should have known better.